Chapter 5. The Ghost. Stokes' consciousness creaked him awake. He blinked and rubbed away the blood that had flowed into his eye from the wound on his brow. The lights of the gallery revealed devastation to his slowly focusing gaze. Pictures were torn from their hangings, sculptures smashed into dusty chunks, spilled paints congealed in shiny, multicolored pools. With an effort, he stood up. The muscles in his back wrenched, and he immediately toppled down. His bleeding head fell back. "This will be your undoing, son," he muttered. "I'll have the old scratcher throw the book at you." He pulled himself up again and staggered over to the sink. His feet crunched over the slashed canvas of Mrs. Blakemore. He gasped and picked up the pieces of the splintered frame. "Priceless," he whispered. "My greatest work in oils." He howled and started to shudder. Patches of deep purple colored his cheeks. "You won't be able to walk after I've finished with you." The doctor walked down one of the corridors on level 3, looking for the relaxation sensor. It had to be around here somewhere, and from there it was only a short distance to the TARDIS. He looked from side to side, weighing the possibilities. His sense of direction really was appalling. But then there had been a lot of corridors in his life. A familiar whirring came from his left. He turned to see K9 trundling along with customary merriness. "You took your time," the doctor said.
"Delay occasioned by variations in topology of environment, Master,"
K9 reported. "Yes, and I don't suppose all those stairs were too easy either." He knelt down to address the dog. "Listen, K9. What do you know of the Uva Beta Uva system?"
"Uva Beta Uva system, 14 planets around toroidal ellipse."
The doctor put a hand over K9's muzzle. Yes, I know all that."
"Thus request for information illogical, Master."
The doctor stood up. "Let's go find Romana." He set off along the corridor. K9's sensors swiveled, and he set off the other way.
"Mistress located in this direction, Master."
He paused before adding,
"Suggest error in your cartographical analysis."
The doctor shook his head impatiently. No, she's on the move. That girl just can't stay still for a moment." K9's tinny voice stepped up in pitch.
"Master, alert. Further analysis indicates local release of..."
He clicked and ticked.
"Radiation in vicinity of the mistress."
"What kind of radiation?"
"Spectrum not in my memory. Mistress may be in danger."
K9 sped off down the corridor. The doctor hurried after him. Margo opened her eyes. She felt better than she had for months. Her head was clear of the worries and doubts that had been whispering through it. She was in her bed, in her cabin. The clock on her bedside table told her it was 1840 hours. What was she doing in bed? She swung her sheets aside and saw that she was wearing her uniform. The single-breasted lapel was stained with blood. She screamed and leapt from the bed. The whispering voice returned, a ghost in her head.
"The time has come. Surrender yourself to me." "No,"
Margo whispered.
"No, leave me alone."
She pushed her knuckles to her mouth to stop herself screaming again.
"You cannot resist," the voice said. "You must die eventually, like all normals. Why prolong your existence?"
Margo put her hands to her head. It was filled suddenly by memories that she knew were not her own. An image was being fed to her, assembling itself segment by segment. She saw a cluster of tents pitched on cold, gray soil, around which were gathered people dressed in simple, sacking garments. Huge umber clouds filled a reddish sky. A hand was grasped tightly in her own. She looked up and saw a tall woman, dignified and beautiful. Somehow, she knew this was her mother. The memories were those of a child. 3 horses were galloping into sight through a split in a nearby formation of rock. The riders wore suits of silver fabric and carried long rifles, their faces angry and excited, visible through the clear plastic panels on their hoods. "Shirads!" their leader shouted, reining in his horse. "More here!" The child felt her mother's hand leave her own. The space it left felt big and empty. She watched as her mother walked slowly towards the men. Her own people, who were backing from the newcomers in fear, parted to allow her through. "Get back!" the leader of the riders shouted at her. He raised his rifle. The child thought he looked very young, not much older than herself. "Get back, Sirid!" The child hated that word.
"Put the weapon down,"
her mother called out.
"Leave this place. This settlement is protected under the Mutant Rights Act of 2278.
The leading horseman laughed, and some of his men joined in. It didn't sound like a laugh, the child thought. Not the kind of laugh she liked. It sounded dirty. "You're Sirids," he said. "You don't." One of the men of the settlement rushed forward, an old man with hunched shoulders and a growth between his eyes. A cudgel was grasped in his hand. He was terrified. He did nothing but shiver and wave the rusty weapon at the riders. The leader put a bullet through his head. The child watched as the old man's face exploded in a red blur. Everybody started to scream. She tried to find her mother. Her heart was beating faster and faster until she thought it might burst from her chest. There was lots of shooting and screaming, and people were falling, covered in blood. She knew it was right to pretend to be dead. That's what she'd been told. So she flung herself down onto the dirt and tried really hard not to move or make any kind of noise. Her insides felt mixed up and she wanted to cry and cry. The noises stopped after a while, but she knew she had to keep still. She heard the horses coming closer. One of them stepped over her. She could tell it was frightened too from the smell it was making. She heard the voice of the leading rider not far away. "They're finished, cleaned up. It's the last sight." He was trying to sound pleased. "What do we put on the report, sir?" said one of the others. "Ritual suicide," said the leader. "Sirids at Site AKB found dead. Cause of death suspected internal poisons." He paused and then ordered, "Burn them." "Yes, sir." The child understood every word. Her people had been slain by the normals. Everyone she had ever known had died in the last few minutes, taken suddenly, for no reason. The normals were going to say her people had killed themselves because they were unhappy and diseased. A funny feeling started in the small of her back. It was more than anger. She had felt that many times before when she thought of normals. It was even more than hate. It made the skin at her temples feel stretchy, as if her head was getting bigger and bigger. She knew she would have to open her eyes to let the feeling out, even though that was the stupidest thing she could do. She rolled over. One of the men noticed her and called, "Sir, there's one left, a kid." He sounded nervous. Her eyes opened. There were bodies all around, twisted and broken, covered in dirt and blood. One of the men was preparing to throw something from a can over the pile of dead. Another held a flaming brand. The leader said, "Kill it!" "But it's a kid, sir," said the man who had seen her moving. "It's a Sirid spawn," the leader said. He raised his rifle and pointed it at her face. The child felt the hate feeling leave her eyes before he could pull the trigger. It shot across the space between them. She blinked and looked again. Where the leader had been standing, there was a bundle of bloody rags and scorched metal. One of the other men shouted, "Get back! It's a Psy Killer!" The hate feeling came back. Sirid, Psy Killer, mutant. Words that she would never have chosen for herself. Words that were a trap. Hate words. The men died as she looked at them. This time, she looked as she did it, and it felt really good. They just had time to scream before they burst. It pleased her. With the last one, she actually caught a glimpse of his bones coming through his skin as it happened. Then there were no sounds at all. She stared at the heaps of death that surrounded her. The normals had caused it all. They had to die. And not just these, all of them. There would be a ship somewhere. She could learn how to use it. She was very clever, she knew. And then she could leave Gwal and go into space. There would be so much hate for her there.
Do you see? Do you feel my pain?
Margo's mind struggled to reassert itself.
I had nothing to do with that. Please, leave me. Your species are all alike. You are all guilty, inferior creatures. You are all to die. I will cleanse the universe of Homo sapiens. You will be the instrument of my revenge.
Margo's hand jerked forward. It opened her dresser. The silver mask lay on top of the neatly folded clothing.
Take it. Wear my face. You will submit.
An inspection hatch on the stairwell creaked open and the doctor's head poked through. "More stairs. Worse luck, K9," he said. He hoisted the computer into his arms and carried him into the semi-darkness of the stairway. "How's the radiation?" he asked.
My sensors indicate that it is clear, Master.
K9 reported.
Mistress Romana is approximately 10 meters down and to your right.
The doctor hurried down the steps. "Romana!" he called. He caught sight of her body, put K9 down, and rushed over. He felt for her pulses and opened one of her eyes. The pupil was unseeing. "Concussion," he diagnosed. He checked the back of her head where it had hit the stair rail. "A nasty bump, but she'll be fine." K9 trundled forward to examine a liquid that was trickling down the upper steps. His head lowered as he carried out a swift analysis. It was almost as if he was sniffing.
Master, I have detected traces of human blood.
The doctor was shocked. "What?"
Human blood, group O, plasma in a solution of...
Shut up, shut up. He took a torch from his pocket and shone the beam up the stairs. His face blanched and he licked lips that were suddenly dry. K9 moved forward to investigate. The doctor covered the dog's eye screen. "No, K9. It's not a very pleasant sight." K9's sensors ticked.
Human body, male. Cause of death, disruption of internal and external organs.
His head pricked up and his blaster emerged from his nose.
Danger, Master. Hostiles approaching.
A clattering noise came from above. A small group of guards appeared. They were led by Sham. He stopped at the sight of the doctor. "Hello, sir." "Hello," the doctor said grimly. "We saw you entering the stairway, sir," Sham explained. "Thought you might be lost and need our assistance." The doctor regarded him with contempt. "You're responsible for security here, am I correct?" "Yes, sir." "Yes, well, while you've been spying on me, somebody has committed a murder." He pointed past them in the direction of the human remains. The guards rushed up the stairs to investigate. Sham looked at K9. "What's that, sir?" "That's my dog," the doctor said simply. "Oh," said Sham. The doctor stared after him as he joined his men. He heard Romana groan as she regained consciousness and knelt to face her. "Well done, old thing," he said, patting her hand. "How do you feel?" She forced a smile. "The way I usually feel after I've been bumped on the head." She reached over and patted the robot dog. "Hello, K9." K9 gave a pleased burble. "Did you get a clear look at him?" the doctor asked anxiously. "Who?" "The murderer." Romana groaned again. "Can't we discuss this in more civilized surroundings?" An anti-bruising bandage and a glass of fruit cordial from the minibar of her suite were enough to restore Romana's wits. She was now pacing up and down the room and attempting to explain recent events to the doctor and K9. "Then I must have blacked out," she concluded. "I think whoever it was assumed I was dead." The doctor rubbed at his chin. What was that Zai fellow doing there in the first place, I wonder? Going for an escape capsule?" Romana shrugged. "I think he'd just gone for a walk, to cool off." "It's not important," said the doctor. "He just happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time." "I know the feeling." Romana finished her drink and put the glass aside. "And this place is full of security cameras. Whoever killed him won't be at liberty for very long." K9 spoke.
Negative, Mistress. I have been studying the station's security system.
The map had been propped up before him.
main monitor devices.
What's more, the corridors around that area would be near enough empty at that time of the evening, the doctor put in. They'll all be at their recreation center, so the murderer could quite easily have gone about his dastardly business without being spotted. He stood up and whispered to Romana. I'm more interested in the radiation K9 sensors picked up at about the time that fellow met his end.
Romana frowned. Radiation couldn't cause such a localized effect. It's impossible.
The doctor wagged a finger. Improbable, shall we say?
No, Doctor. Impossible.
Master,
K9 piped up.
this unit is keen to clarify earlier statement. Energy released in the vicinity of Mistress Romana was identified as radiation by vocabulary bank. I cannot say if this diagnosis was correct.
The doctor knelt down. Did you take a profile of the readings for full analysis?
K9's head drooped.
Negative, Master. Such an action relegated by concern for the mistress.
The doctor patted his tin head. Good dog, K9, don't worry yourself about it.
He looked up at Romana, his expression grim.
I have a terrible feeling that we've been wasting time.
What do you mean?
He stood up. Whatever's going on here is far more serious than I imagined. The power to kill like that could be the least of this person's abilities. He gave another of his sudden smiles. I think it's time we had another little chat with friend Spigot.
You think the murder is connected to the computer sabotage?
I think it's more than likely. Sham looked around the stairwell. Flashes from the camera of the security photographer lit the deeply lined face of Pierpoint, who had joined them on the stairs. It's Zysa, Stokes' apprentice, Sham reported. I don't know what hit him. He loosened the collar of his uniform. There isn't much left. Pierpoint shook his head. Murder aboard this station. It's a terrible business. A group of men walked past carrying a stretcher. He halted them and reached for the white plastic sheet that covered the remains. I wish to see this. There's not much left, sir, Sham warned him. The plastic sheet was lifted. Sham saw a look of revulsion cross Pierpoint's face, but mixed with it was a brief tension of muscles about the jaw that he could have taken for anger. It was the same irritated response displayed by Pierpoint when a barrister rambled into a long and specious argument. Pierpoint replaced the sheet and waved the stretcher party and their grisly burden away. And you say the doctor was here? Yes, sir, with the young lady and some kind of computer. He said it was his dog. Do you think they did it, sir? Pierpoint gave one of his rare laughs. They are police officers, Sham. I think it is obvious who was responsible. His jaw tightened. I argued against the government for years on this matter. Perhaps now they will see I was right. You think it was Stokes, sir? I do. That idiot should never have been permitted to take one step aboard this station. Find him. Yes, sir. The junior officer started to move away. And Sham, I want security status raised to black. No transmat communications, arrivals, or departures are to take place without personal authorization from myself. He hesitated. This matter is to be kept private for the moment. I don't want to cause a panic. Tell the people there has been a technical fault.
We regret to inform you that a technical difficulty will delay all transmat communications for the next few hours. Please be patient while we assess the situation. Normal service will be resumed as soon as possible.
Spigot sneered up at the speaker. And the first beacon satellite has just gone into orbit. Wonder what they're trying to cover up. He lit another cigarette, popped it into his mouth, and opened the door to his cabin. It contained Romana, who lay on the couch. How did you get in here, then? The doctor's head popped up from the minibar. No sign of any ginger beer, Romana, he said. He caught sight of the detective. Ah, Mr. Spigot, we were just about to have a drink. Would you like to join us? This is my room, mate, Spigot said threateningly. I think we should have a little talk about privacy. Really? The doctor said. I think we ought to have a large talk about murder. Spigot sighed and threw the bulging Zayas file onto a table. Romana picked it up and started to examine the contents. Hi, called Spigot.
Hold it a second, lady. And what's all this about murder?
The doctor forced a drink into his hand. We were very much hoping you could tell us. Have a cherryade. Spigot looked down, confused, at the soft drink. Not really his style.
I've already explained the computers.
The doctor put a hand over his mouth. No more flimflam, please. The performance is over. And you needn't worry about the bugging device either. He removed his hand. Spigot shook himself. He hadn't reckoned on this. They were cleverer than they looked.
You knew?
Romana looked up.
Oh, yes.
The doctor grinned triumphantly. To use an old Earth expression, Mr. Spigot, you were throwing us a line. All that stuff about the security net was designed to get Pierpoint looking in the wrong direction, yes? He clicked his fingers, and what looked like a metal box on wheels trundled into view.
Bugging device located and destroyed as instructed, Master.
It reported. Spigot jumped back, alarmed.
What the hell is it?
The box took this as an invitation to introduce himself.
This unit designated K9 Mark II. Purpose to assist and protect the Dr. Master and Mistress Romana.
Spigot shook his head in bewilderment.
Where are you lot from?
Romana smiled.
Aren't we from Central? That was all part of it too,
Spigot admitted, uncomfortably.
I took a gamble that paid off. I figured you were stowaways and were looking to get bailed out. Decoys and distractions, see? Good tactic, always works. With you two running about, old Pierpoint would be kept even busier. I knew he'd order a check on the security data core after he overheard our conversation. That's just what I want, because, believe it or not, I was telling you the truth. It'll take days and I can get on with the other business, which I didn't tell you about. How are you to know we weren't criminals?
Spigot gave a wry grin.
I can sniff a crim from the other side of a nebula, love. And I've seen characters like you before. Space Nicks, Romanese. Harmless, but useful.
He was pleased to have an opportunity to explain himself.
Thought I'd read you right. Still, when you want results, you have to take risks.
Quite right, said the doctor. We work in similar lines, you see. You might say that we, he indicated himself, Romana and K9, are freelancers. We saw through your deception straight away. He sniffed. And your performance was just too reckless to be convincing. The delay in your warrant, your ham-fisted break-in, none of it made sense. Unless you weren't telling the whole truth.
Which had to be something very important if you were keeping it back from the High Archon.
Romana held up the file.
I presume this is it? Makes for rather gruesome reading.
The doctor raised an eyebrow. Oh, really?
Committal papers, indictment, and trial documents in the case of the state of Uva Beta Uva 5 versus Zeus of Gual. Romana read aloud. According to this, she killed at least 2,000 people in the space of 2 years. And all before her 19th birthday.
I never liked early achievers, the doctor said with feeling. I was barely out of long socks at that age. Spigot was glad of the chance to explain the situation.
Haven't you heard of her? We travel a lot, Romana said. She was a Serid. Some say the last.
The doctor held up a hand. Sorry, Serid?
Spigot looked at him, confused. You have been away, mate. Serid stands for Cellular Remission and Decay. They were mutants, see. Escaped the purge of Venosus and set up settlements on Six. Her particular talent was to crush people where they stood.
He pursed his lips and made a squelching sound.
Over in a flash, but very messy.
Romana and the doctor exchanged a glance that was deep with significance. Spigot, the doctor said, I think you'd better tell us everything you know about this Zeus. Stokes pressed a bag of ice onto his wound and winced. A couple of cups of tea, topped up with a small dash of his favorite liqueur, had gone a small way towards the restoration of his spirits, along with the visions of Zai's likely humiliation and punishment that were passing through his imagination. Yes, he said with relish, adjusting the bag to tend to his throbbing brow. They'll spread you out and flog you until your bones squeak, my lad. The door of the gallery burst open abruptly and a group of guards burst in. Their leader, a young chap Stokes recognized as Sham, took a step forward. Stop right there, he shouted. I wasn't intending to go anywhere, Stokes said disdainfully. It took you long enough to get here, but then I have come to realize that efficiency is the last thing one may expect from you gentlemen. His eyebrows shot up as he noted Pierpoint pushing through the group of officers into the gallery. The great Sandshaker preserve us! This is a most unaccustomed pleasure. Pierpoint stared at him. Stokes, I warn you, do not attempt to resist arrest. You will be shot if you try. Arrest? Stokes gasped. You dangerous and deluded old prune. What erroneous conclusions has your aging intelligence brought you to now? He gestured about him. I think you would be better occupied locating the miscreant responsible for this vandalism. Pierpoint signaled to the men. Take him. The guards moved forward and took Stokes by the arms. He stood still, almost unable to speak, his face gathering color again. His mouth opened and closed a few times before he managed to say, Pierpoint, you senile trout! I fail to see the slightest glimmer of logic in this action. The High Archon said gravely, Menlove Stokes, I arrest you for the murder of Eviscerate. Anything you say will be taken down and may be used in evidence against you. You do not have the right to remain silent. Stokes was now totally perplexed. Zai is dead? He said incredulously. But surely... He took the bag of ice from his head and revealed the wound. Look at this! Listen, I've been quite insensible for the last hour at least. Pierpoint turned to Sham. Take him to the detention area. When the miners went into 6, the Searids weren't happy. A lot of them topped themselves. Some of them formed little armies. They didn't stand a chance, Spigot explained. Romana was appalled. You're talking about genocide. An entire genetic strain wiped out. Spigot looked unmoved. Don't get sentimental about it, dear. They were in a pretty sorry state. Probably better off dead. I doubt it. Carry on. Well, Zeus got away from 6 somehow. Pretty soon after, there were terrorist incidents on 5. Buildings, people, random attacks. Hundreds killed. The worst thing about it was what she left behind. Squelched stiffs. He paused. The tech div boys reckoned there was something up with her genes that let her do people in just by looking at them. Some sort of impulse she could send out. An enlarged brain, and that meant she was pretty much a genius too. Computers, bomb making, an expert. Then how was she caught? Asked Romana. They tricked her. Clamped a metal box around her head, then she was powerless. Put her on trial here about 3 years ago, and she goes to the particle reverser. No surprises. He stubbed out another of his cigarettes. That should have been the end of it. Then, 2 months ago, a survey base was done on Planet 11. I thought this system had been fully mined out, said Romana. Not 11, Spigot explained. It's pretty small, and the atmosphere's too thick for a survey to be done from orbit. But with the recession on, the big mining cores can't afford to pass anything by. McConaughey Mining put down a base there at the end of last year and started to carry out a survey. Anyway, someone pretty clever waylaid their transmat beam, got in, killed their engineer, and switched off the life support. Wiped their computers and transmatted out again. We thought it was pirates at first. He grimaced and stared into the distance. Then we saw the body of the engineer. Squelched. Romana began to understand Spigot's mission at last. So you were sent here to check up on the execution of Zeus? Uh-huh, and I had to cover my tracks, because the whole thing's secret. No one outside the force and the top brass at McConaughey knows about it. And of course, in a case like this, nobody's beyond suspicion. He picked up the file and weighed it in his hand. And there's no doubt about it, Zeus fried 3 years ago. He shook his head, looking puzzled. Looks like I've got a ghost on my hands. It may interest you to know, the doctor said, that your ghost has struck again. He related the story of Zai's death. Spigot sprang from the couch and started to pace up and down the room. Romana reflected that the carpet had probably not been paced over quite so much for many years. There must be a link, the policeman said. Someone's found Zeus' secret, I reckon. Worked out how to kill Leica. He nodded, resolute in this theory, and it falls to me to nail the creep. Romana put a sympathetic arm on his shoulder. I shouldn't worry, Mr. Spigot. You've got us to help you. He brushed her off. Oh no, love, I'll work alone. His features took on an expression Romana recognized from portraits of martyrs the doctor had hung in the TARDIS power room. I can't get too close, you see. It's what gets me results. If anyone takes risks, it's going to be me. The doctor seemed to have lost interest in Spigot's aggrandizement. A ghost, eh? He mused. What do you make of that, K9? The computer had been listening to the conversation attentively.
Existence of ethereal phenomena unproven, Master. Suggests corporeal explanation for anomaly.
Oh, really? What explanation? Romana knew that K9's ability to see things in purely logical terms had proved useful before. This was not to be such an occasion.
Cannot specify. Insufficient data.
No, you never do know the answer when it's something important, do you? The doctor turned to the others. Let's go and find some more data, shall we? Spigot's objection to their further involvement was cut short by a bleep from his communicator pad. The voice of Pierpoint issued from the tiny speaker.
Doctor, Romana, Spigot. I wish to see you all in my office immediately.
We'll come straight away, the doctor replied. There's a lot to talk about.
I have already made the arrest,
Pierpoint said.
I require you to make a statement regarding your involvement in this matter.
Romana was confused. An arrest? Who?
Stokes, of course,
said Pierpoint.
I shall expect you forthwith.
He broke the call. Spigot nodded slowly. Stokes? Yeah, the artist guy. I've heard about him. And he had contact with Zeus before her execution. She could have shown him a few tricks. Motive, means, opportunity. It all fits. He appeared slightly disappointed that what had seemed only a few moments ago to be a challenging mystery had evaporated. The doctor stared at him incredulously. I wonder how you have ever succeeded in your profession, he said. It doesn't fit at all, not even slightly.